Some 2 years ago, I had a conversation that's been living in my head ever since. I was talking with someone about a geopolitical conflict in Europe, specifically about my country's role in it. And this person, someone I considered reasonable, looked at me and said, "We are on the side of peace, you are on the side of war." Just like that. Simple, clean, a line drawn right between us. Now, I could have gotten defensive. I could have argued about historical context, about security concerns, about all the complexities that fill headlines and heated debates. But instead, I found myself stuck in something else. The absolute certainty in their voice. They weren't saying, "I believe this." They were saying, "We are good and you are bad." And I've thought about that moment constantly since then. Because here's the thing. I don't see myself as a warmonger. I genuinely don't. I have family, I have friends. I want the same things everyone wants. Safety, stability, a future for people I love. So how can two people look at the same situation and come to such opposite conclusions about who's right and who is wrong? This question led me down a rabbit hole I didn't expect. I started reading psychology, sociology, anthropology. I wanted to understand not whether one side was right, but why humans in general seem incapable of sustained peace. Think about it. Divorce rates in many Western countries hover around 40 to 50%. That's not nations fighting. That's two people who once loved each other, who shared a bed and dreams and children, now incapable to coexist peacefully. Workplace conflicts are so common that companies spend billions on mediation and HR departments. Families fracture over inheritance, over politics, over who said what at Thanksgiving dinner. Neighbors divide over parking spaces and fence lines. And nations? Well, nations have been fighting since nations existed. The Roman Empire fought for centuries. The Hundred Years' War lasted 116 years. The 20th century, the most technologically advanced in human history, gave us 2 world wars, multiple genocides, and enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet dozens of times over. So here's the uncomfortable question I want to explore today. What if conflict isn't a bug in the human software? What if it's a feature? What if the same psychology that allowed us to love our children also makes us suspicious of strangers? What if the brain that enables deep friendship also creates tribal hostility? And what if pretending conflict is avoidable, that only bad people fight, actually makes us worse at managing the conflict that will inevitably come? I'm not here to justify any particular war. I'm not here to excuse atrocities. I'm here to ask a different question. If we really want peace, don't we need to understand why we keep failing at it? Let's start with a discovery from 1971 that changed how psychologists think about group conflicts. Imagine you are a teenage boy in the early 70s. You show up to a psychology lab in Bristol, and a researcher asks you to look at some paintings. One set is by Paul Klee, a Swiss-German artist known for his colorful abstract work. The other one is by Wassily Kandinsky, a Russian painter whose work is also abstract, just different in style. So you're asked which ones you prefer. Maybe you point to the Klee paintings, maybe the Kandinsky. It doesn't really matter, because here's the secret that researcher isn't telling you. Your preference doesn't actually determine which group you're placed in. The assignment is completely random, absolutely meaningless. But you don't know that. You're told that based on your artistic preferences, you're now in the Klee group or the Kandinsky group. And then comes the task. You're asked to allocate points that will later become real money to other boys in the study. You don't know who these boys are. You've never met them, you don't know their faces or names. All you know is one small piece of information, whether they are in your group or the other group. Now, if you're a rational actor, if humans were purely logical, you'd distribute points evenly. After all, these groups are meaningless. You gain nothing personally by favoring your group, right? You lose nothing by being fair to the other group. But that's not what happened. Again and again, across multiple experiments, the boys gave more points to members of their own group. They systematically disadvantaged the other group. And they did this even when they could have maximized total points for everybody by cooperating. Even when they gained nothing personally, even when the groups were based on nothing real. This was the minimal group paradigm developed by psychologist Henry Tajfel, and it revealed something deeply unsettling about human nature. Now, who was Henry Tajfel? This matters. Tajfel was a Polish Jew who survived the Holocaust. He fought in the French army, was captured by Germans, and spent the war as a prisoner. He lost most of his family in the concentration camp. He had every reason to believe that some people, Nazi for example, were simply evil, that discrimination came from bad people with bad intentions. But his research led him to a different conclusion. He found that discrimination doesn't require bad people. It doesn't require hatred. It doesn't even require conflict over resources. All it requires is a category. Think about implications. You and I could walk into a room right now. Someone flips a coin. Heads, you are on team blue. Tails, you are on team red. Within minutes, without any reason to care, you'd start subtly favoring people who share your random coin flip outcome over people who don't. We see this everywhere. Sports fans who genuinely believe their team is more deserving, their players are more talented, their victories are more meaningful, even though they had nothing to do with the team's success. Nationalists who believe their country is objectively better, their culture is richer, their history more noble, even though they were born there by accident. Tajfel's work explains something crucial about human conflict. We don't fight because we hate. We hate because we fight. The group identity comes first. The negative feelings follow. A 2001 study by Dobbs and Crano put it this way. When people are accountable to their in-group, they become more biased. They feel pressure to show loyalty. And showing loyalty often means putting down the outer group. So here's the first piece of the puzzle. Humans are wired to form tribes. And once tribes exist, conflict becomes more likely. Not because anyone is evil, but because that's how group psychology works. Now let's add another layer to this. Because social identity theory explains why we favor our group, but it doesn't quite explain why our groups are so small and why we struggle when they are not. Enters Robin Dunbar, a British anthropologist who made a fascinating discovery in the 1990s. Dunbar was studying primates, and he noticed a pattern. The size of a primate's neocortex, the part of the brain involved in conscious thoughts and social reasoning, correlated directly with the size of its social groups. Bigger neocortex, bigger groups. Dunbar did the math. He calculated what the human neocortex size would predict for human social groups. The number he came up with was about 150. This is now known as Dunbar's number, the theoretical cognitive limit to the number of stable relationships a human can maintain. Not acquaintances, not people you recognize, but relationships where you know who they are and how they relate to you. Here's what's fascinating. Dunbar found that our social relationships actually form layers, just like concentric circles. At the very center, you have about 5 people. These are your closest loved ones, the people you turn to in a crisis, the people you can't imagine your life without. The next circle holds about 15 people. These are your good friends, the people you enjoy spending time with, who matter to you rather deeply. Then other 50 people. Friends, people you'd invite to a party, people whose lives you follow with genuine interest. Then 150 people. This is your meaningful social network. People you know personally, who know you, who have some place in your life. Beyond that, you have about 500 acquaintances. People you recognize, might say hello to, but don't really know. And up to 1,500 people you can put a name to a face. But here's a crucial point. Everything beyond 115 becomes increasingly abstract. You can maintain real relationships with thousands of people. Your brain isn't wired for this. Now think about what this means for modern society. We are living in cities of millions. We're connected to people on social media by the thousands. We're expected to care about fates of entire nations, entire continents, entire global population. But our brains, well, our brains are still designed for that savannah, for the tribe of 150, for the smaller group where everyone knows everyone, where reputation matters because you will see these people tomorrow, where cooperation is natural because you're in this together. Dunbar's number explains something crucial about conflict. When groups get too large, we can't maintain the natural bonds that keep peace. We need hierarchies, we need laws, we need institutions, and we need police and courts and armies. And here's the problem. Those institutions are run by humans with the same tribal brains. Humans who will always favor their in-group, even when that in-group is supposed to represent everyone. A 2019 BBC feature on Dunbar's work put it simply, we can only maintain 150 relationships. Everything beyond that is management, not connection. And management, as we know, often fails. So when nations clash, we're not seeing millions of individuals in conflict. We are seeing tribal brains operating at a scale they were never designed for. We're seeing the ancient software trying to run modern hardware and crashing regularly. Now let's talk about fairness. Because in every conflict, from a divorce to a war, both sides believe they're fighting for fairness. The husband who feels his wife doesn't appreciate him, the wife who feels her husband doesn't listen. Both are convinced they're being treated unfairly. Both have evidence and both are sincere. The Serb who believes Kosovo is the historical heartland of his nation. The Albanian who believes Kosovo was stolen from his people. Both have historical claims. Both have suffered. Both feel wronged. The Russian who sees NATO expansion towards its historical borders as a threat. The Ukrainian who sees Russian troops on his land as an invasion. Both feel they are defending themselves. Both feel the other is the aggressor. Now, if fairness were objective, if there were a universal scale that would measure who's right and who's wrong, these conflicts would be easy to resolve. Just measure, calculate, and declare the winner. But fairness isn't objective. A 2017 review in the Journal of Applied Psychology by Barclays explained why. They found that when people form perceptions of fairness, they are not neutral. They are not neutral calculators weighing evidence impartially. They are what the researchers call active and motivated processors of information. Translation: your goals, your identity, your group membership, All of this shape what you see as fair. If you're part of a group that's been historically oppressed, you'll see current events through that lens. If you're part of a group that's historically been dominant, you'll see threats to that dominance as unfair. Both are real, both are motivated. Here is another layer. Research on the better than average effect shows that we constantly and consistently rate ourselves as more fair, more honest, more capable than others. Think about that. We see ourselves as complex, nuanced, with rich inner lives and understandable motivations, while others, they're simpler, more stereotyped, less filling. In conflict, this plays out predictably. We see our own actions as responses to circumstances. We see their actions as reflections of their character. I cut them off because they were being unreasonable. They cut me off because they are just rude. We invaded because we had legitimate security concerns. They invaded because they're expansionists. We are defending ourselves. They are aggressors. This is called motivated cognition, and it's not something only biased people do. It's something everyone does. Your brain automatically filters information to protect your identity, your group, your sense of self. Now add one more element, loss aversion. Research by Kahneman and Tversky, which won a Nobel Prize, showed that losses hurt about twice as much as equivalent gains feel good. Losing a $100 banknote feels worse than finding a $100 banknote feels good. Apply this to conflict. When a group perceives that it's losing status, losing territory, losing respect, that loss feels enormous. And the motivation to prevent loss or reverse it can override almost everything else. This explains why conflicts persist even when the original cause is long gone. The loss was felt, the grievance was encoded, and now, generations later, people are still fighting over something that happened to people they never met. Fairness isn't objective, it's always subjective, motivated and filtered through identity. And that means in any conflict, both sides genuinely believe they are right, not pretending, not manipulating, actually sincerely, deeply believe it. And if both sides believe they are right, how do you resolve that? This brings us to one of the most controversial and most discussed and most misunderstood experiments in psychological history. I'm talking about the Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo converted the basement of Stanford University Psychology Building into a mock prison. He recruited 24 male students, screened to be psychologically healthy, average, ordinary young men. Then he randomly assigned them to be either guards or prisoners. And what happened next shocked everyone. The guards, ordinary students who'd never shown any particular cruelty, began behaving in brutal ways. They forced prisoners to do push-ups. They withheld food. They inflicted psychological humiliation. So within 36 hours, one prisoner had an emotional breakdown and had to be released. Others followed. The prisoners, meanwhile, became passive, depressed, dehumanized. Some accepted the abuse as normal, others turned against each other. The experiment, originally planned for 2 weeks, was stopped after just 6 days because a graduate student who later became Zimbardo's wife saw what was happening and said, "Well, it's just terrible what you're doing to those boys." Now the Stanford Prison Experiment has been criticized. Later researchers suggested that the guards may have been coached to behave harshly, The sample size was small, the ethics were questionable, all valid critiques. But here's what the experiment still teaches us, even with its flaws. Situation matters. Roles matter. Power matters. These weren't monsters. They were Stanford students, future doctors, lawyers, professors, put in a uniform, given a role, placed in a situation that encouraged dominance, and they became unrecognizable. Zimbardo himself later reflected on this. He said, and I'm quoting roughly, "Psychology is not an excusology. Understanding why someone acted badly doesn't excuse the action, but it does help us understand that under the right conditions, any of us could act in a way we'd never predict." This is deeply uncomfortable. We want to believe we're good people, that if we were in Nazi Germany, we'd be in the ones hiding Anne Frank, not the ones turning in our neighbors. That if we were guards, we'd be the kind ones, the protectors, the exceptions. But history suggests otherwise. Most perpetrators in history were not psychopaths. They were ordinary people. Farmers, teachers, clerks, factory workers who found themselves in extraordinary situations and did terrible things. Not because they were evil, because they were just humans. Now I need to be clear. Understanding is not excusing. Knowing that ordinary people can do terrible things doesn't make those things less terrible. It doesn't mean we don't hold people accountable. I guess what it means is that if we want to prevent atrocities, we need to look beyond bad people and look at situations, at systems, at the psychological force that turn an ordinary person into a perpetrator. And that all brings us back to conflict. If conflicts were just about bad people doing bad things, we could solve it by identifying and removing such individuals from the society. But conflict persists because it's ingrained in our psychology, into our group identities, into our limited social brains, into our subjective sense of fairness, into our capacity under pressure to do things we'd never even imagine. This isn't pessimism, it's realism, and realism is the only foundation for real peace. Now, let's zoom out even further. Because individual psychology is one thing, but what happens when you multiply that psychology across millions of people, across centuries of history? Political scientists suggest that the root cause of conflicts are, in their words, innatus, present at birth, built into the structure of human society. So it is indeed default. Look at the evidence. The 20th century, the century of progress, of enlightenment, of technology and medicine, was also the bloodiest in human history. Since World War II, there have been over 250 armed conflicts around the world. Roughly 4 per year, every year, for 75 years. And that's just the big stuff. Divorce rates in developed countries, as I mentioned, hovers around 40 to 50%. That's millions of families fracturing every year. Workplace conflicts are so common that the global market for conflict resolution services exceeds $10 billion annually. Political polarization is rising in nearly every democracy. So what's happening here? We're not getting worse as humans. We're running ancient brains in a modern world. Our tribal brains, designed for groups of 150, are now connected to billions through screens. Our sense of fairness, shaped by personal interactions, is now applied to abstract nations and distant conflicts. We've built a world that exceeds our psychological capacity, and then we're surprised when conflicts emerge. So let's return to that conversation I mentioned at the very beginning. The one where someone called me a warmonger. Here is what I understand now that I didn't understand back then. That person wasn't being unreasonable. They were being humans. Social identity theory says that they've drawn a line between us and them. And once that line exists, the bias follows automatically. Dunbar's number says they were processing a conflict involving millions with a brain designed for 150. And Zimbardo's work says that under different circumstances, any of us could be that one being called a warmonger. Now, does this mean all sides are equally right? Well, no. Does it mean we shouldn't hold people accountable? Of course not. Does it mean we stop fighting for peace? Absolutely not. What it means is that we need to be humble. We need to recognize that our perceptions are filtered through identity, through group membership, through motivated cognition. We need to understand that the other side, whoever they are, feels as justified as we do. Again, Zimbardo said that psychology is not an excusology. It's about understanding the motives. And understanding, real understanding, is the only thing that might help us manage the conflict that will always be with us. And maybe, just maybe, that awareness is the closest thing to peace we'll ever get. Not peace as the absence of conflicts, but peace as a conscious, constant, difficult management of it. So the next time someone draws a line between us and them, pause. Remember Tajfel boys with their meaningless groups. Remember Dunbar's 150 number. And remember that under difficult circumstances, you might be the one on the other side of that line. Understanding doesn't mean agreeing. It means seeing clearly. And clear sight is the only thing that might help us navigate the conflicts we'll never fully escape.